morning.
Good morning.
I can tell we're back to normal because y'all still hadn't been or not quite, but a little bit. Glad to have you. Yes, ma'am. Come on. It is here.
Well, we got power back the day after the storm. The day of the storm, it flickered and it flickered and it flickered and finally went out. And then we were out about 1:30 till 1 afternoon till about 6:30 the next morning. Came back on. We did. And everybody else came in. So Jim's theory is that the guy that's the head of the
All right, we're back to getting started. Good morning, everybody. Hey, we got a couple of visitors, and you can't really call them visitors because they've been here before. Duke and Heather Bradley right here. You know, for those who don't know Duke, he was our youth minister when we first came here. And then when we got here, we got to get out of here, so they left. Glad to have you back. They used to keep our nursery full, but now they keep the middle school and high school.
Drew graduated and Chris is 21, so. And
No way, no way, no way. Really.
wow.
We're trying to kick him out.
I know the feeling. She didn't hear that. Yeah, that can't be true because Heather doesn't even look like she's much older than 21 now. Duke, I'm not so. Anyway, glad to have y'all here, really. I am going to pass the prayer list around, and just take as long as you need to. Is Tony here?
Yeah, somewhere.
Great message we had this morning. If you missed it, you're going to have a good one in the second service too. It's really, really good. And it seems to always have some kind of connection with our lesson, even though we're talking about Psalms. But there's a few things in there that are the same. I do have a couple of announcements. Birthdays this week. Anne Marie Lucas is on tomorrow, but I don't see her here. Billy Garner's is on Wednesday, and Owens is on Saturday. Where's Lynn?
She was here because she brought us some chocolate friendship bread.
Hey, I was going to say, it is here. There is snacks somewhere. Where's
Back here by the coffee.
Just feel free to get up and go get it, even when Anne's talking, because it's back there in the back. Owen and Lynn brought some chocolate
friendship bread. Amish friendship bread.
Amish friendship. I will get y'all some books as soon as I get through here, and I'll bring some Sunday school books back there in the back. We got plenty. Anything anybody else want to announce real quick? All right, let's have a word of prayer, and I'll turn it over to Ann. You're off there with the initial video, right? Oh, there's the camera. We already started, haven't we?
We have.
Okay. All right, let's pray. Father God, thank you for this day you've given us. Thank you for getting us to where we are today, Lord. There's a lot of stress in this last week, and there's still a lot of stress going on with a lot of people. I just pray you'll be with them, be with those first responders that are out there, all the people that are out helping, rescue squad, power people. You know who they are, and whatever they're doing, be with those that have trees in their house, that don't have power. Help them just turn to you, and we acknowledge that you're in control. Nothing happens unless you allow it to or you cause it to, and we thank you for that. I pray right now, as we listen to what you have to say to us, that we will hear the words that you have to say to us. Speak through Ann. Help us to remember what we're talking about, that they never really could keep us, they cannot keep us down, Lord, if we depend on you. Speak to us with the words that we need to hear. Open our minds and hearts, and praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good morning. It's just so good to be here, y'all. I mean, we really, Kayla and I talked to Randy Friday, and at that point it was like, well, we hope we have church. And so, just praise the Lord that we're here. It makes you really appreciate being able to come together and worship. And y'all, 2020 is going to go down as the year of, I don't know, bedlam, I guess. It's just been incredible. And today, our lesson, we're going to continue with Eugene Peterson's book. His book is called Along, Obedience in the Same Direction. I'm going to remind you, Eugene Peterson is the one that wrote The Message. Now, he was a Presbyterian minister, and I'll tell you, sometimes I read, now our lessons, the Southern Baptists take these books and they vet them, okay? They read them, they write the lessons. Eugene didn't write our lessons. They read his book, they made the lessons. Some of what he says, I don't really agree with. I mean, there have been a couple of times that Jim and I said, honey, I don't know, but I get, and I know that if you were to go purchase this particular book, there'd be lots of passages maybe like that. But he's also, of course, very, very knowledgeable about the Word, and if you read the Message, and I love to read the Message, what I love to do, because I'm not that bright, I have to work really hard to get it sometimes, and so I like the New American Standard Version for word interpretation. But sometimes I'll read that word for word interpretation and I say, huh? What do I mean? And so then I can turn to the Message and he clarifies, okay? And then I can go back to the New American Standard and read through and think, oh yeah. Now I do not ever, because the Message is a paraphrase, assume that that's all there is. The paraphrase will give you like the main ideas, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit today about something in this lesson. I thought, I'm not sure I agree with him as much as I agree with other commentators. But now, I don't have a seminary degree, and then, like I said, it's just me doing my Bible study and trying to figure it out so I can tell y'all. But I do feel pretty serious about that, and I don't ever want to tell y'all something that isn't correct. But we are continuing with our study on the Psalms of Ascent. And I don't have a PowerPoint this morning, y'all. I did make a PowerPoint, but I did not send it to myself on email, so Kanan doesn't have it. So, it's at home on my laptop. But we'll be okay. All right, we'll be all right. But we're doing a long obedience in the same direction. And we're talking about discipleship and how, discipleship isn't quick and easy. And we talked the first week about work. Last week we talked about happiness. And this week, the topic is perseverance, and we're talking about Psalms 129 this week. We did 127, 128, we're doing 129. So if you want to open your Bibles to that, since I don't have it up on the PowerPoint, we will be reading in that and studying in that in just a minute. A lot of us, and I look around, I see some younger faces, so you may not remember, but our cars, when I grew up, there were 3 channels on TV, and that's probably because I lived in Birmingham, Alabama. That's why I had 3. Right? And but every night they signed off, and every night they played, all 3 channels would play the Star Spangled Banner. You'd hear the Star Spangled Banner play, and you knew the TV was fixing to go off, okay? But every now and then when you were watching the television, and sometimes still on the radio, they will have this like sound, this, and it's the emergency broadcasting system. Y'all remember that? And they kind of, what are we doing? You're looking it up for me. Thank you, sweetheart. That's great. See what a smart girl. Can you do the Message version? See up here where it says international? Drop down and do Message. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, it'd probably be under the Message, alphabetically with the T. But anyway, while she looks for that, so Tony Evans says he remembers when he was young watching television, and that would come on, and he said it was never at a good time. He was always in the middle of his show, and it wasn't like. If y'all remember, you just missed that minute or so of show because they couldn't go back and replay it. You just missed it. And so if it was that emergency broadcasting system, of course at the time, you know, at my school, we would even do bomb raids. And I remember, because we were in I think it must have been the Korean conflict wasn't far out of the way when I went through elementary school. I remember mothers would come out in their lawns and they'd do a signal, you know, over the intercom, and we'd walk home. And mothers who were designated to watch after us would come out in the lawns and watch as people walked home. That's just the world we lived in. Never worried about it. It was fun. We missed half a day of school. But those tests always seemed to come at the worst time, okay? It would interrupt your show. Well, you know what? Life's tests are like that too. They're never timed right. I mean, you know, who wanted a hurricane this week? And praise the Lord, it wasn't as bad as Ivan. Now, Ivan was ferocious, and if you were not here, this one, it's a piece of cake, okay? I mean, it was a lot of trouble, I know it was, but Ivan was. I've had friends who have weathered every hurricane and sat out and watched it, and we stayed for this one, and they said, I will never sit through another hurricane. It was horrible. And so, you know, these things happen, and there's other things. I mean, you know, the coronavirus has interrupted a lot of lives. You know, it's just never any advance warning that the test is coming. But we do face tests. You know, the doctor comes in and says, there's a bad report. Or the company's boss calls you in and says, they're downsizing. Always catches you off guard. You're never prepared. Okay, God, okay, in our devotional this morning, he told me, someone's gonna call me in, I'm gonna lose my job. You don't know that when you leave the house that morning. That's happened to a lot of people around here. You know, you just never see that warning, those setbacks of life. They show up at the most inopportune times. But following Jesus is a long obedience in the same direction. Okay, that means that even through our trials, even through our difficulties, that if we persevere, that we're going to learn through faith how to walk closer with God. And that's what our lesson is about today. There was a quote by a gentleman named Paul Goodman, and I did not look up who he was, so I don't know. But I thought it was a great quote, and this is what he said. It's in the beginning of your lesson. It says, patience is drawing on underlying forces. It is powerfully positive, though to a natural view it looks like just sitting it out. How would I persist against positive, eroding forces if I were not drawing on invisible forces? In other words, it takes that invisible strength, it takes the Holy Spirit to persevere, and it doesn't mean the person who is patient, the person who gets through problems calmly, it will have an effect on everybody else. You know, if you're ever in a group of people that's upset about something, and then someone who, especially if it is someone who is known as the leader, can retain their cool, everybody else retains their cool a little bit better. It's a tonic effect. It's like a calming effect. But if you lose it, everybody else loses it. You know, President Trump has taken a lot of flack over not saying at the beginning of the coronavirus how serious it was. That's one of the accusations they have against him. And he said, I didn't want to cause a panic. He was saying exactly what the medical experts told him to say. But one of the things he has said is, you know, I could have gotten up and said, oh my goodness, we're all going to die. And it would have been mass panic. You know, when you're a leader, you have to figure out how to say things that are bad without causing that type of reaction. So then everybody's brain doesn't shut down and you can kind of get through it and you can plan and you can work through things. I mean, that's just wise. That's wise leadership, y'all. To just not say the absolute worst. You want to say enough that everybody gets prepared, but you don't want to cause people to go get in their underground bunkers or shoot themselves. I mean, you know, there's a balance there you've got to have in life. And so what he's saying is if you have difficulties, if you have that patience while you're going through difficulties. You know, I appreciate Brother Randy's leadership because he hadn't all screaming and hollering and fussing and going into panic about the hurricane. Friday afternoon he said, well, you know, we hope to have church, but, you know, we may not. And it would have been okay. You know, no one is going to panic over that. That is good leadership. But at the same time, while you're the one being patient and you're the one, you know, keeping your chin up and you're the one encouraging everybody, that doesn't mean you enjoy it. It just doesn't. It doesn't mean it's a fun time. Doesn't mean you don't get it. Doesn't mean you don't see the seriousness of it. It just means you're not in a panic, that you're trusting, that you are aware, but that you're trusting God, and it's going to work out. That's what that means. That is perseverance. So let's look at Psalm 129. They've kicked me around ever since I was young. This is how Israel tells it. They've kicked me around ever since I was young, but they never could kick me down. Their plowmen plowed long furrows up and down my back. Then God ripped the harnesses of the evil plowmen to shreds. Oh, let all those who hate Zion grovel in humiliation. Let them be like grass in shallow ground that withers before the harvest. Before the farmhands can gather it in, the harvesters get in the crop. Before the neighbors have a chance to call out, congratulations on your wonderful crop. We bless you in God's name. Now, look at those first couple of verses. They've kicked me around ever since I was young, but they never could keep me down. Now, this psalm is what you call an imprecatory psalm. That means it's expressing a collective viewpoint. He's not necessarily talking about himself and his personal problems. He's talking about the problems of Israel. Okay, and he's saying that the people of God have gone through some tough times, but the people of God are tough. Okay, and he says the world has waged war against the people and the people of Israel. And he's got some real graphic language in here. We're going to talk about it a little bit. I don't know. I'm sure all of you remember the Soviet Union and the wall that was built to keep the East and the West separated. And under President Reagan's presidency, that wall came down. But when the Soviet Union was powerful, they persecuted Christians. We heard this morning a story about how Nicaraguan Christians right now are being very persecuted. This happens all over the world. But at the time, the Soviet Union really persecuted Christians, and there seems to be a fear among communist governments that if you're loyal to something other than them, that you're going to rebel against them and that they don't have total control. That seems to be why they hate Christians. But they did that, and for 70 years, Christians in the Soviet Union were persecuted. And then one day, when the economy in the Soviet Union was crashing because communism, socialism doesn't work, and yes, it has been tried, and the economy's crashing, and they're sitting around a table, and Gorbachev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, he's looking around with his top-level bureaucrats, and they're talking about how the economy has disintegrated, and he says, why do we oppress the people who do not absent themselves from work, who are not alcoholics, and who give us a good day's work? The Russian regime found that it was hard to argue with lives well lived through Christianity. But it took 70 years. 70 years of persecution. For finally, they made an impression because they lived the life that Christ led them to live. The Christian faith is not a fragile lifestyle. In Isaiah 53, verses 1 through 3, it says, the servant grew up before God, a scrawny seedling, a scrubby plant in a parched field. He was looked down on and passed over, a man who suffered, who knew pain firsthand. One look at him and people turned away. This is a picture of extreme rejection. People, you're so rejected. Have you ever seen someone that's hard to look at? It's like, oh my gosh. As school teachers, and everyone who's taught for any length of time has probably had this experience. When a child shows you something, a sore, a bruise, something that they shouldn't have, and then you have to go and report that. And there have been times as a principal that the nurse has called me and it's almost nauseating. And you just want to turn away. You just want to say, how could this ever happen? You know, those types of things. Sometimes you'll see someone that is so abused, it's just hard to even look. And that's what they're saying here. They're saying that there are people who are extremely rejected, that there are people who have painful persecution. I don't necessarily want to hear all the stories about the persecution. I have a hard time watching the Jesus movie because when they do the crucifixion scene, I don't want to see it. It hurts me, and it makes me it just hurts my heart. And I know I see a lot of y'all feel that way, but it is what it is, and it is a reality. And so what they're saying here is that in Isaiah 53 is that the servant of God, who was Jesus, was people turned away from him. People couldn't look at it. And then looking at, continuing in chapter 53 of Isaiah, in verses 10 and 11, says, he'd see life come from it, life, and more life. And God's plan will deeply prosper through him. Out of that terrible travail of soul, he'll see that it's worth it and be glad he did it. Through what he learned, my righteous one, my servant, will make many righteous ones as he himself carries the burden of their sins. So that was Jesus. That's how it was with Jesus. His ministry began with 40 days of temptation in the desert, and it ended at the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, that's bookends of trials, isn't it? I thought you start with these trials and faced with the devil, and then you end in the Garden of Gethsemane and on the cross. Okay? He experienced relentless, merciless pounding. Lots and lots of trials in Jesus' life. So, what came from that? Well, what came from that was he's on the cross, he shows incomprehensible kindness. He says, Father, forgive them. And then there was the serenity. Father, I place my life in your hands. And then resurrection. So the end result was worth it. But going through those trials, Jesus had to know this is going to end okay. And that's what we have to know. We have to know who holds our future. And we have to know that as we go through trials, that God, it's going to end okay. And, you've heard that said before. It's okay because we know who won the game. We can watch a ball game sometimes where we know who won and we're still cheering. Like it matters, because we know who won. But it's still you just want to do great. And sometimes I'll watch a movie. When I was a kid, there weren't that many movies that would come on, but one that we loved to watch was Old Yeller. And at the end, I would always pray the ending would change. Why would the ending have to be so sad? And I've told y'all before about reading Where the Red Fern Grows. Now, when I taught different ages, but I taught emotionally disturbed and learning disabled children. And I had a group of kids at one of the schools I taught in who were all boys. I mean, they were all 7th, 8th. It was a junior high and all 7th, 8th, 9th grade boys, or maybe 6th, 7th, 8th. Might have had one little girl, but anyway. And I just tried to get them to love reading. Every class I've ever had, I've wanted them to love reading. So we would, after lunch, we'd have a little story time. Well, these are pretty rough kids. But we decided we would read Where the Red Fern Grows. Y'all read, who's read Where the Red Fern Grows? Oh my God. It's a fabulous story about a little boy and his 2 little hunting dogs. But there is a chapter where the dogs die. And it's very sad. And I had asked the principal, I saw the principal was a fine gentleman, and I said, would you mind reading to the class one day? He said, I'll be glad to, but I'm not going to read the chapter where the dogs die. So I read it, and I couldn't, I'm just sobbing. I mean, I can't get through the look of every boy in the class is crying. I mean, it's just one of the saddest chapters in a book, but I don't know how about all that, but anyway, life has got adversity in it and fun. It's terrible and it's heartbreaking. And you just want to overcome all that, and you don't want to have to go through all that. But you know what? We all do. We all go through that. And some of us worse than others. Now, 2 Corinthians 11. I will also talk about Paul. Now, Paul's life, we've talked about this before, his life was also full of adversity, right? And 2 Corinthians 11, 23 through 29 is the passage. But we've talked about that a lot in the last few months, so I'm not really going to read off that whole passage. But he was flogged. He was beaten by Roman rods. He was pummeled by rocks. He was shipwrecked 3 times. He had fended off robbers. He had to ford rivers. And he did all of this because of his passion for sharing Christ. To him, those persecutions and those anxieties, that didn't matter. What mattered was that he could get past all that adversity and share the gospel. His focus wasn't on his adversity. His focus was on, what can I do to overcome this so then I can go and I can spread the gospel. And what 28 and 29 says this, he said, verse 28 and 29 says, and that's not the half of it. When you throw in the daily pressures and anxieties of all the churches, when someone gets to the end of his rope, I feel the depression, I feel the desperation in my bones. When someone is duped into sin, an angry fire burns in my soul. He wasn't angry at the Romans for beating him. He was angry because someone was duped into sin. Now, that's a perspective for you, isn't it? I mean, that's the perspective we should all have. Because Paul understood perseverance. He persevered. None of that stuff he went through had the power to push him off his path, because he knew what his passion was for, and he knew what God wanted him to do. And you know what? Paul also put a high premium on faithfulness and perseverance. The people who worked around him, he expected them to be faithful and to persevere. Remember the problem he had when John Mark young John Mark went off on that first missionary journey with him, turned around and went home. Paul didn't want anything to do with him. He was tired of it. He said, no, one time, that's it. You can't persevere, you can't go with me. And it took others intervening to get John Mark back with Paul, okay? Because Paul didn't have patience with it. And Demas, in 2 Timothy, he says, for Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. And then in 2 Timothy 4:16, after he had been through a trial at the Roman courts, he said, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. He didn't make any bones about it. You know, if you weren't there when he thought you ought to be there and you weren't able to persevere, he'd call you out, because perseverance was important. And he knew how important that was. We live in a day, and teachers, you can just raise your hand and say amen. We live in a day of a short attention span. Oh my gosh. My sister-in-law, she's got 2 boys, 13 and I think 8 maybe. And she said the 3 or 4 days without Wi-Fi, she thought they were going to die. She said, they can't think and can't do without their Wi-Fi. It's it's a different world. And it's not that they're even, my little grandbaby had her on my hip, she's 1 year old, had my phone, she reaches over and goes. She'd seen it so many times, what am I supposed to do? And you run the risk of them not being, and I don't really know how to say that, if you can totally keep them away from machines. You can. But then they're socially not relevant. Does that make sense? They don't understand certain things, and you've got to be able to navigate that. I think I feel about that like I felt about school. I feel like our children, we kept them in public school, although I debated that and I struggled with that, and of course we made sure we put them in a good public school, but I just felt like, well, if they don't face certain trials now while they're in my household and I can influence that, what happens when they're out in the world and I'm not there any longer? And that was just one of my thoughts. And so I think a little bit about the internet is, if you don't teach them how to navigate it now while they're in your home, what do they do when they get out? But I do think you got to balance that. There's got to be some rules. And I personally have a problem with children taking cell phones to bed with them. I think they should all. I think a cell phone's a computer, and I think computers stay in the family room. That's my preference. Did I say that's what my children do? No, but that's what my preference would be, okay? Because I think that, a little bit of accountability keeps you from veering off. And it's not just that your child might accidentally get onto something. There are people who are targeting your children. So you've got to be real careful on that internet. But we live in a day of short attention span. Kids want it right now. It's almost like you got to perform in order to be able to teach, and you sure got to keep it moving. There's nothing worse, and I've been in a lot of classrooms observing, and I can tell you probably 1 or 2 teachers were so poor at this that I couldn't stay awake for a 30-minute observation. Now, if I can't stay awake for a 30-minute observation, that's a problem, okay? And we got to, you got to step it up a little bit if that's the case. Because kids can't learn in that environment. They can't. And it's not that they're trying to be bad. It's the way they were raised. It's just a different world. But the world of faith isn't a fad. And it isn't taken up in just one little 5-minute time. It is over centuries. It's a long walk. And that's, God doesn't have a short attention span. And what happens in your life could impact things for a long time or may not. You might not ever know why something happens in your life, but God has a purpose, and He uses that in His big scheme. in his overwhelming scheme. Now, in verses 3 and 4 of Psalm 129, it's very interesting. It says, their plowmen plowed long furrows up and down my back. Then God ripped the harnesses of the evil plowmen to shreds. Well, that's a word picture for you, isn't it? And the visual picture is Israel laid out like a body, and then the plowmen are just hitch up their oxen and just plow bloody furrows in their back. They're just plowing them. You know, when you plow, you break up, and that's what that is. And it says long gashes cut into the skin and into the flesh, systematically, like a farmer working the field, up and then back, and then up and then back. And the whole thing it's just cruel. There's blood, there's pain, there's back and forth cruelty, and then all of a sudden, the plows aren't working. It's almost like they're like a comedy. You know, I mean, it's like these plowmen don't realize they're not making a furrow anymore. Now, if you're working a plow, I'm sure you'd know if it stopped cutting to the ground, but these plowmen don't realize it. And they're just plowed away, but there's no more blood and there's no more furrows. And that's what the picture is here. They're plodding back and forth, and if they ever looked behind them, they'd see they weren't making any leeway, but they don't look because they're too stiff-necked. So they never check their work. They just keep on going, and God has just ripped their harnesses, and that's what the psalmist is saying. He's saying God's taking care of all that pain because he has ripped those harnesses to shred. And then there's another kind of illustration and a similar like truth at the end of Isaiah 53 scripture we read. It said that you're talking about the grass in shallow ground, how it'll spring up, but then it just dies away. So that type of opposition will spring up. God, it's going to all die away. The life that is opposed or indifferent to God is kind of like that grass. Springs up a little bit, and then it just dies away. Something that they said in our lesson is this. They said, the way of the world is marked by proud, God-defying purposes, unharnessed from eternity, and therefore worthless and futile. Wow. Certainly not some way we want to be. In the 16th century, there was a reformer, a church reformer called Theodore Beza, and he said this to the King Henry of Navarre. Okay, this is a great statement. He said, Sire, it is the lot of the church of God to endure blows and not to inflict them. But may it please you to remember that the church is an anvil that has worn out many hammers. Amen. Gosh, what a statement. The church perseveres. Now look at verses 5 and 6. Oh, let all those who hate Zion grovel in humiliation. Let them be like grass in shallow ground that withers before the harvest. Now, after these verses in your lesson, it talks about the psalmist seeking vindication. And Peterson actually kind of gives him a little out. It's kind of uncomfortable to think that the psalmist is asking for God to let these enemies grovel. Because aren't we supposed to forgive? I mean, it's kind of like, that's kind of hateful. You know, I mean, to wish bad things on your enemies, we're not supposed to do that, are we? And Peterson talks about that quite a bit because it just doesn't seem to be an appropriate response. And you struggle with that condemning tone. And it's not like, I mean, the psalmist wasn't a Christian because Jesus wasn't there, but he had other scriptures. I mean, there was, you shall not hate your brother in your heart from Leviticus. And if you meet your enemy's ox or his ass going astray, you shall bring it back to him. That's in Exodus. And in Proverbs, don't laugh when your enemy falls. Don't crow over his collapse. Vengeance does belong to God. Doesn't belong to us as people. And so Peterson kind of justifies the psalmist's feelings by saying this. He says, the person who makes excuses for hypocrites and rationalizes the excesses of the wicked, who loses a sense of opposition to sin, and who obscures the difference between faith and denial, grace and selfishness, that is the person to be wary of. And what he's saying is, if you don't care, you don't get mad. You know, you care if your child, you care about your child, so when you tell them don't go out in the street, and they go out in the street, you're mad at them because you care. Okay, it's a horrifying scene what might happen if you didn't happen to catch them before they went out. And so, the only way to keep from feeling to keep from feeling angry about abuse is to not care about the thing being abused. That's it. That's just that's it in a nutshell. But let's remember, this is an imprecatory psalm. The psalmist isn't talking about personal enemies. He isn't talking about someone who hurt his feelings. He's talking about enemies of Zion, enemies of the church. And he is praying that God's ultimate will be done. That's what he's doing here. He's not praying that, you know, hellfire and brimstone be rained down on his personal enemies' heads. He's saying, God, the enemies of Zion, you know, that's who you need to put down, is those enemies. So it's not that it's a personal thing. But now what Psalm 129 is telling us is that perseverance is passionate. If you're going to persevere, you have to be passionate. And also that the Psalms aren't really sung by perfect people. He is feeling very angry. Randy talks about anger this morning in his lesson. But he said, you can be angry and not sin. But what he's caring about, what the psalmist cares about, is God and about the ways of the kingdom. And he's saying that morality, justice, and righteousness are important. And he cares when someone makes the righteous way difficult. He cared that Israel had gone through all of those trials. It was a problem for him. Perseverance isn't resignation. It isn't saying, oh, well, it's okay, we'll stay. Just don't worry. We'll just keep on. That's not it. That's not it. You still have to have an endurance that takes you from strength to strength. And it's not, I mean, I don't know how many of you are keeping up with John MacArthur and his church, but now they are persevering under a lot of prosecution right now in California, and he's standing strong. I don't see anything wrong with what he's doing. He's saying, no, we're going to follow God. We're not going to follow the state. And if you are up on what he's doing, then y'all need to read about it because it's pretty fascinating. And he's doing it with kindness, and he's doing it with love, but he's saying, no, we're going to do what the Bible tells us to do. And it's a calling that we all have, and we may all face having to face down some government entities in the future. He has to because of who he is and his position and all that. Right now, y'all, we've really not had to do all that. We still live in Wilmexie, Alabama, and people around us pretty much, if they don't love the church, they respect the church, and it's a different world in some places, even in America. But the application for us is that we need to know that feeling angry is a sign of passion about what we love. And then you've got to be careful about how you express that anger. But asking God that his will be done, that's not a problem. That's good. And that's a good way to handle your passion. The theme of Psalm 129 is really God wouldn't put up with the abuse of his children. He sticks with us. He doesn't put up with that abuse. He's got a plan, and it's going to be a victorious day one day. But he said it's a real relationship between us and him. He cares about us. He's watching over us. We persevere partly because we have faith that he's taking care of everything.
And
God is righteous.
let me say
Yes.
one thing.
You got to sit over here so you can wave at me.
But when you persevere, you have a passion, and you persevere because of that passion.
That's right.
But you have all of these things that knock you down, and you have to have so much patience and pray for grace to get through all that stuff so that you can continue to persevere. And that's why people who are in the ministry leave the ministry. They get tired of the fight a lot of times. I'm just saying, speaking from our points of view, we've done it for a long, long time. But the passion is still there because we were called to do a certain job for God. And it's just like all the Christians in this room, we are called to live a certain life, to uphold the standards of the Bible, and to do what we know is right, no matter what is going to knock us down. And we are knocked down all the time with, government principles. We go to school and we see that injustice prevails in lots of situations. But it's hard to remember that God is in control of all that. Because
really
you keep
Yeah.
living and living and living, and 2020 is a great example of that. People just live, and then you get knocked down here, you get knocked down, and you're like, can I persevere and not give in?
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to give in when it's because the enemy is persevering.
The enemy's relentless.
He's
That's
relentless.
right. He's relentless.
So,
And if you're committed to serving God, you're his enemy.
right.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
And,
Anyway,
yeah.
sorry, I gotta go.
Okay. Melissa is right, and I think that we've got to be very aware that when someone is in the ministry, that they're out there like a target. I mean, those are the people Satan wants to attack. And you know what, y'all? We don't need to let him use us to do it. We just don't. We got to be very uplifting of our servants that work with us. Even if we don't agree with everything they do, you can still be loving and kind and supportive and not add to those trials that the devil might put on them. And I gotta shut up. It is 10:38. I mean, I gotta sit down. I'm telling you, I am persevering with this lesson, buddy. There you go. Okay, Jim, you gotta come up here and take prayer list, because I am not gonna get through this. I have digressed way too much today. But anyway, thank y'all very much. And I just do want to say one more thing before I sit down. I just want to say, y'all got to realize that things that God calls you to do may not be an overnight success. And your feelings might get hurt. And ministry is messy and it's never quick. Discipling new believers is long-term growth. Witnessing to a lost friend is rarely an overnight success, and you might not know if it's successful. Effective Christianity in a snapshot. It is a long-term, full 2 or 3 hour feeling, okay? And you just don't know what the conclusion is going to be, because it's going to be played out in eternity. All right, bud.
Okay, we've got a few minutes. I'm going to go over this prayer list. Not real quick, but not slow either. And we'll get it all snapshot, whatever it is.
We'll send it out.
Send it out.
That's right.
Mike Bronze is having his left knee replaced on October 21st, right? And he's going to rehab in Atlanta? Or are y'all coming back here?
No, we're coming back after just a couple of days, a week, just so he can try.
Okay. Molly Kelly, we mentioned her last week. She did have an ultrasound on Friday. She's having a colonoscopy this Friday. Still in a lot of pain. I hope everybody got the word on Marsha Brown. She is scheduled. They had their meeting with the surgeon. It's just she's going to have a lumpectomy on the 29th, a week from Tuesday. So, and it should take care of it. Remember the people in our class who aren't here, especially Joe and Nell and Samuel and Francis. They're not going to be getting much out of their house, especially the Jacksons. They told me that they're doing well. Both couples are doing well. But Joe and Nell, you know, her granddaughter from Arizona, Brandy Acuna, has been here several months taking care of them. She's fixing to move to Texas. But she told Ann on whatever day y'all went over there to take that her daughter and some other people are going to help take care of them. So they're in good hands. Samuel Francis are doing very well. They're just not going to get out. They don't come to church until this is over. Susan Copeland-Sparger's surgery got postponed. Not a date set yet, right? The family of Clint, what was his last name, Pam? Do you know? We talked about him last week. He was on his deathbed. He did pass away. Pruitt, okay. And he was, the brother-in-law was able to go pray with him and speak with him, witness to him, but we don't, okay. Lynn told me this before she left. Owen had failed 6 times yesterday, 6 times. And it's not that he's not adjusting to his leg, he's adjusting to his leg. Well, he's just doing too much, and he won't slow down. And he's just tired all the time. So she's concerned about him. He said yesterday, I'm just ready to go home. So remember him. Bailey, she's in Fort Lee, Virginia, doing well.
She loves it.
At the AIT training. Still praying for the Beloved house to sell. Any lookers?
Pray harder.
Okay. Pray hard. We've been praying, I promise. But you stay over there sometimes?
Well, I stayed one night this week.
Because you had power. Good idea.
We could save our freezer, but
Yeah.
just sitting there.
Cynthia Martins, you know, she's the CEO of the hospital. She's got, you may have seen the article in the paper a couple weeks ago, she's got breast cancer. I guess she's going through the treatment now. Dennis McKinley says he's doing well. Thanks for the prayers. Are you through with PT? Also, Jerry said that Sheila's numbness in her hands is a whole lot better. Right? Is it gone? Good.
Good.
Right. Let's do a couple of praises. Tammy is traveling to Washington DC. I think her brother's already up there, Bob, okay, for that revival that starts, when, this week? It's already started.
Monday, I believe.
It's Monday, okay. So pray for that revival. And then I won't leave this out, this to me is, most important we need to pray for today, and that's, Linda Donovan asked for prayer for April.
Do I need to turn this off? Your-
You want me to turn this
your
off?
Facebook Living.
You wanna turn this off? Turn it. Bye, y'all.
Bye.